Danielson. The Pizza Delivery Guy by Hervey Copeland.
I used to work as a pizza delivery guy in Detroit for several years. I'm not going to tell you what part of the city I used to live in, or the name of the pizza chain that employed me. It's not important, and besides, it has absolutely no bearing on the story I'm about to tell. The neighborhoods I used to work in were fairly stable, but sometimes I was sent to areas that had been truly devastated by recession. If you've ever visited Detroit or done a Google image search on urban blight, you know what I'm talking about. The incident occurred late in the fall a few years ago, and the memory of it will stay with me until the day I die. It doesn't matter how hard I try to suppress it or force it down out of my consciousness. It always floats back up to the surface like a dead, bloated fish and lets me know it's still there. Anyway, here's what happened. It was a Thursday evening. It had been a hectic shift and I was making the last delivery for the night. The order was going to a residence in one of the less savory parts of town. That didn't really shock me. It was to be expected every now and then. Even folks in rough areas order pizzas and have cell phones. After all, this is the US we're talking about. But I have to admit, I wasn't too thrilled about the possibility of getting mugged or shot. Any half-decent car in a poor section of town is fair game for the local gangbangers. And believe me, there are plenty of those in Detroit. The house was just a tiny little fibro shack on a big corner block. There were no lights on inside, and for a brief moment I prayed I had the wrong address. But a quick look at the mailbox out front quashed my hopes of a safe getaway. I cursed silently as I gazed over the desolate property. The moon was out, and that made it even creepier. I could see the grass on the lawn was knee-high, and there was rubbish everywhere. The fibro sheets were riddled with holes, and the windows were boarded up with plywood and adorned with graffiti and bullet holes. Needless to say, I had a very bad feeling about what was about to happen, and if it had been up to me, I would have just kept on driving. But that was out of the question. I couldn't afford to lose my job, and career opportunities weren't exactly growing on trees in this city. So I stayed where I was. I took a few deep breaths to try to calm myself, and said a quick prayer, even though I don't believe in God. Then I grabbed the pizza boxes and reached for the Coke Zero bottle next to me in the passenger seat. Then I found myself walking up to that house. The cold evening air gushing through the area was racing in and out of my lungs like pistons in a car engine. The gravel road made crunching noises every time I put my feet down, and I kept looking around nervously, convinced some psycho was going to jump me any second. But no one came. I was all alone. As I climbed the concrete stoop leading up to the porch, I noticed the front door was ajar, and I stopped dead in my tracks and just stared at it. For some strange reason, it scared the crap out of me, and I could feel my heart start to race along even faster. A voice inside my head kept telling me to get the heck out of there, and I have to admit I seriously entertained the idea of just leaving the pizzas on the front porch and taking off. But I knew I couldn't. I had to follow protocol. Leaving food outside a residence was a sackable offense. So I walked the rest of the way to the door and gave it a quick knock. The force of my fist striking the old timber made it move, and a loud guttural sound escaped from somewhere deep inside me as the squeaky hinges gave off a high-pitched wail. But no one came to the door. I swallowed hard, braced myself, and put my knuckles up to the door again, and this time I shouted the words, "Your pizza's here," into the dark void. But still there was no answer, and I foolishly believed I was off the hook. Then, as I was about to turn around and leave, a faint, cold, raspy voice coming from somewhere deep inside the old house told me to enter. I stood absolutely still, staring at the gap in the door with eyes that were ready to pop out of their sockets. And for a brief second, I started wondering if I'd just imagined it. But then the voice called out again, and this time it kept repeating the words over and over, like it was reciting an incantation. It had a menacing quality to it, and my whole body started shaking. That's when I made up my mind. I threw the pizzas down, not really giving a damn about whether I had a job to go back to the next day or not. Then I legged it. I jumped from the top of the stoop and ran like a lunatic down the driveway back to my car, and almost ripped the door off its hinges as I threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a good 10 seconds just to get the engine started. Then I raced out of the neighborhood as fast as I could, gasping for air all the way back to the restaurant. Maybe it was the effect of the adrenaline wearing off, or maybe it was just a delayed reaction, but when I opened the door and got out of the car, I threw up. A whole gutful of yellow, disgusting puke. But at least I was alive, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, I woke up to someone banging on my door. When I opened it up, 2 police officers greeted me with stony expressions. After asking me a few questions, one of them took a step forward, looked me straight in the eyes, and informed me that 2 pizza delivery guys had been found dead inside the house I'd ran away from the previous evening. Both of them had been hung by the neck from an exposed joist in the lounge. He then pulled out a picture from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to me. He gave me a few seconds to study it, and then he told me that they had found the picture taped to one of the bodies. It contained 3 faces. 2 had a big red X drawn across them. The last one didn't. The last face was mine. I managed to look up at the officer and shake my head before I passed out and hit the floor. The next day I left Detroit, and I've never been back since. But even now, after all this time, I always look over my shoulder when I'm out and about. I'm also pedantic about staying indoors after dark, and always making sure my doors and windows are locked. The killer in Detroit was never caught, and as long as he's out there, I'm on my guard. And why shouldn't I be? He obviously knows who I am. But does he know where I live?